We're now going to move on to our two guest speakers to address us today, and our first guest speaker is Mr. Don Spinks AM. Mr. Spinks enlisted in the Australian Regular Army on the 16th of January 1979 and was employed as a cavalierman for almost 40 years. He's seen operational service in Egypt with the multinational force and observers in 2004 and the Middle East area of operations with Australia's Joint Task Force 633 in 2010. His last appointment in the Army was as the 10th Regimental Sergeant Major of the Australian Army. He's been awarded 2 Orders of Australia as a result of his service to our nation. John joined the Department of Veterans Affairs in February 2019 and took up the appointment of the Repatriation Commissioner on the 1st of July 2019. I would now like to ask if you could please welcome Don Spinks to the microphone.
Thanks, Simon, and g'day everyone. I'd just like to start by thanking your State President, Tony, and the board for inviting me to come along today. These occasions and gatherings like this are extremely important to me because it's where I get ground truth. And for the last 3/4 of an hour, I've just been listening to ground truth. So I sincerely thank you for that. And I also shout out to those in the outposts that we've heard from in that last Q&A session. I think it's great innovation and great use of technology. So well done, RSL Queensland. So on behalf of the commissions, and the commissions sit outside of the department, but life support comes from the department, and I really want to make that clear. Independent entity from Department of Veterans Affairs, but working in collaboration and in partnership, delivering the services support needed to veterans and their family. But on behalf of the commissions, I'd like to thank each and every one of you, sub-branches, your districts, and in fact the leadership for the support that you've given to our community, the veteran community, over what has been an enormously challenging 2020. So started out with some fires, some weather events, and then turned into COVID-19, which has been beaten to death. But throughout all of that, each and every one of you have continued to deliver the services and support to veterans and their families right across this state, and keeping people safe and informed and well supported. So from the commissions to you, a very big thank you, because without you and those like you, the veterans would be far worse off, particularly given this year. Today I'm going to keep it simple. I have a short period of time, and followed by the Shadow Minister. I'll probably get into trouble if I take up any of Shayne's time. But I just want to talk about key changes, both in the commissions and in the department, which have a direct impact on you. I'm not going to talk about reforms, I'm not going to talk about budgets, I'm just going to talk about people mostly. And really, as I started up front, it's just to say g'day to you and hopefully have an opportunity later on to have a chat. First, I want to talk about some changes within the commissions. In August this year, the new Deputy President for the Repatriation Commission was appointed, Ms. Kate Pope, from inside the department, but Kate has a specialty in policy, which is really important, and she filled the position vacated by Craig Orme when he departed at the end of last year. So there's the start of the horsepower. We also recently appointed in August the Veterans Family Advocate, or Commissioner, that was announced in February, along with the National Commissioner for Defence and Veteran Suicide Prevention. That position was filled by Ms. Gwen Cherney. Gwen is the inaugural Commissioner. She is a war widow, and she has a son serving in the Army in Townsville. So she has lived experience, and I can't think of a better person to fill that role. The challenge for her is high. The mountain is high. She will attempt to design veteran programs and have input into policy and the services provided through the DVA portfolio, focusing on mental health. And these are really challenging times right now for Gwen, but I'm confident in her abilities. The final position on the commissions I want to talk about is the Defence Engagement Commissioner. Again, appointed in August of this year, and some in this room, in fact many in this room will probably know, former Major General retired Stuart Smith, now known as Mr Smith. Stuart is the inaugural Defence Engagement Commissioner, and his function is to engage directly into defence. It's timely given the IGADF release of the report, but more importantly, Stuart is looking forward to what are the changes to service. What is the service proposition? How does the department remain informed on changes that the Defence are making? And if you look at the domestic operations ongoing at the moment with COVID, the servicemen and women are being put at risk by the Commonwealth to support the people of Australia at home, in the streets, in the suburbs, in the towns, the cities in Australia. So what does that mean? So Stuart will do a lot of work, much needed work in that space. So what from that? There was one, me, doing all three roles. That's now been split into three, thankfully. Some would say I was doing it very poorly. Bit harsh, but now each commissioner has a lane and can focus in on the areas, and more importantly, more horsepower means more tempo. That means more work within the department as a result of those appointments. So I just wanted to highlight those. I'll skip on now to another announcement that was, or correction, a recommendation in the Productivity Commission, and I'll get to that in a minute. The Joint Transition Authority has been stood up and established in Defence, but it's a tripartite. It's Defence, DVA and Commonwealth Super Corporation are all involved. And the Joint Transition Authority will focus primarily initially on the governance, the gap between service and no longer serving. And it has some challenges, and Brigadier Wade Stoddard is the man who's the Director General of that organisation, and we are engaged weekly with that organisation to try and define and build that aeroplane while it's flying. But the end result should be a more seamless transition for men and women once leaving the Defence Force full time. I just want to touch briefly on the gorilla in the room at the moment, which is the IGADF inquiry and the findings. And you would have had to have been on Mars not to have been informed or be aware of what's going on. It is an extremely challenging time for Defence, but more broadly for the veteran community. And I'm aware that everyone will have an opinion on it, and that's okay. But what I'm asking, and what I ask of you, is not to judge. There are families, there are children, there are others, there's collateral damage who are suffering at the moment, not necessarily directly involved. What it requires is us as a veteran community to reach out and put our arms around that group and support them, not to judge them. This will be enduring, it will last for a long time, and it will continue to be painful, but it has to be done. I just ask that we support those in need. Reach out, check your mates. That's my ask of you. The Veteran Support Officers, a new term. Many would recognise that as on-base advisory service. Veteran Support Officer, the change in the name is deliberate. What the name says is what it delivers. On 53 bases at the moment around the country, if Don has his way, that model will proliferate more broadly and go into the general veteran community to offer that direct contact and direct support and advice and concierge or assistance back into the department. Not competing with advocates, but augmenting, supplementing or supporting. And that's a very important capability that's been introduced into the department. Although they're working on defence bases, they are departmental employees. National Commissioner for Defence and Veteran Suicide Prevention, announced in February along with the Veterans Family Advocate, Gwen Chernay. That process is going through Parliament at the moment. Not everyone supports the idea, and that's fine, but it is a mechanism that was built to try and support veterans and identify where the touch points are or where the friction points are and what's causing so many veterans to end their own lives or take their own lives. We'll just have to watch and shoot in that area where and how far that goes. But again, it's being delayed. We need some mechanism, and I'm not suggesting which mechanism, to help more formally, more practically address this issue. Last thing I want to touch on is the productivity outcomes, and I thank all those that raised the advocacy issues before. The Rob Cornell report has been wrapped up into, the government has chosen to wrap it up into the Productivity Commission report. Many will have noted that some of the recommendations in the Productivity Commission report were addressed in October in the October budget. My hope is that that will be finalised in the May budget, but again, these are decisions for government, and hope's not a method, and I appreciate that, but to change what's happening in the advocacy space will need resources, but it will also require your valuable input for changes to make things better in that space. I am not the expert in advocacy, but I am someone who worries about it, because not just in this forum, it's been raised this morning, but in every other forum I go to, it's an issue. As Rob said, from Townsville, it's on the radar. I have no doubt we'll talk about it tomorrow morning at the table, but you are being heard. So Tony, that's all I wanted to cover off on. Thank you for the privilege, but again, as I started, thank this group for the support that you've been providing through some what are quite difficult times for our veteran community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Don. Very much appreciated. Could you now please welcome Shadow Minister for Veterans Affairs and Defence Personnel, the Honourable Shayne Neumann MP.
Hello. Thanks for the invitation to speak to you today. It's a pleasure to be here. And I first want to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet, the Turrbal and Jagera people, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. Thank you very much to you, Tony, and of course the board. Thank you for hosting this, and thank you for having me here today. Distinguished guests, including those representatives from the Moreton region in the electorate of Blair. I see one or two I recognise. I think Doug Cook's out there somewhere. He sort of keeps me philosophically honest in Toogoolawah. Thank you very much to the RSL for what you do, and I know with 240 RSL sub-branches across 10 districts, you make a huge contribution to our local communities, and thank you for what you do. As the Federal Labor Party, I want to work with you to advocate, of course, and to look for the best possible conditions for those who serve, and to promote a spirit in the community of respect, gratitude and support for veterans. Particularly, we want to see real and tangible support for veterans and veterans communities. As Don Spinks, for whom I have enormous respect and regard, said before, 2020 has been a very challenging year for the Australian community, and particularly for defence and veterans communities. I know the coronavirus pandemic posed huge challenges for RSL Queensland and its sub-branches and veterans across the state of Queensland. At the onset of the pandemic, I reached out to RSL National, RSL Queensland and ex-service organisations like Mates for Mates to see what support was needed and where, as an opposition, Labor could assist. The early feedback I got was that more resources were needed in the space, more frontline mental health services, welfare services to support current and ex-service personnel, particularly vulnerable veterans living in isolation and loneliness in regional and rural communities in particular. I wrote to the Minister for Veterans Affairs, Darren Chester, in April to ask him, amongst other things, to increase the Department of Veterans Affairs fees for mental health services, including psychologists and psychiatrists, to help reduce the long waiting times for veterans, particularly seeking mental health professionals. I was pleased to see the government responded to that, and finally in the budget increased DVA fees for mental health, social work and community nursing services in October this year. There's still a way to go to improving access to services in many parts of the country, but it was disappointing that the government didn't increase DVA fees for allied health workers, having indicated not just to a number of people, including their own backbenchers, that they would do so, particularly for physiotherapists, exercise physiologists and occupational therapists. We were disappointed that the government stimulus package didn't include more support for charities. It's why we call for additional assistance. Many RSL sub-branches, as you know, are volunteer run and don't qualify for JobKeeper accordingly. So the government left out those organisations in the stimulus packages that they provided this year. This year has been different. Anzac Day commemorations were very different this year for all of us, and we found new and innovative ways to provide that commemorative experience to honour those who served. And it's fantastic to see that the community embraced the RSL Light Up the Door initiative. I know in my street in Ipswich, we saw people in their thongs and T-shirts and standing there and whole families there experiencing that and lighting up the dawn. And I know that was the experience across Queensland. So thank you, RSL Queensland, for what you did. It's a great initiative you undertook in these circumstances. People experiencing and commemorating at home in their own personal way. This year, of course, 15th of August, we saw the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II, victory in the Pacific, an extraordinary generation of sailors, soldiers, airmen and women and nurses, 12,000 of whom are still with us today. I want to commend RSL Queensland for its outstanding support to sub-branches and veterans during this time. Initiatives such as veteran homelessness support services, the employment programs. More than ever, veterans needed help during the pandemic. I note in July, RSL Queensland reported a 26% increase in inquiries on their homelessness program, a 39% growth in wellbeing services, and a 113% increase in employment inquiries. Goes to show how the impact of the pandemic was having on veterans' communities. This comes on top of the shocking figures we've seen nationally. About 5,800 ex-service men and women are homeless in any 12-month given period, and 1 in 10 of our rough sleepers in Australia are veterans. It's a national shame. There are many reports that show too many of our veterans have slipped through the cracks, struggling to cope with life after the ADF. I'm pleased to hear RSL Queensland's really stepped up in their responses and their challenges, expanded their wellbeing programs, compensation support, homelessness and employment programs. Thank you, RSL Queensland, for what you've been doing. Now, we've called on the Morrison government as the federal Labor opposition to not leave it just to ESOs and to the states across this space. The fact is we need to do more for our defence personnel, and when it comes to transitioning out of the ADF and into civilian life, and we support the Joint Transition Authority that Don referred to earlier. There needs to be more assistance for employment, housing, homelessness, fundamentally with mental health and, of course, suicide prevention. The release last week of the report that Don referred to, the Inspector General of the Australian Defence Force inquiry and the allegations of war crimes committed by Australian Special Forces in Afghanistan, was a difficult moment for our nation and for our defence and veterans communities. I want to acknowledge the RSL Queensland statement and associate federal Labor with the statement that you issued. Thank you very much for what you said. We agree that the allegations in the report in respect of a few don't detract from the sacrifices of many who've served our country, in particular the thousands of current and former soldiers who've served in Afghanistan. This is a very distressing time for many who've shown extraordinary bravery, I might add, in speaking up about what they saw and knew was inappropriate and reprehensible conduct, and for veterans in our community more generally. It's why it's very important that individuals and families get the support they need at this time. Already there have been reports that in the last 3 weeks, 9 serving and former defence personnel have taken their lives, to tragedy for those individuals and their families. In the last month, the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare reported 33 suicide deaths amongst serving and ex-serving ADF personnel in 2018, and 465 suicides between 2001 and 2018, although anecdotally the community and the veterans community believe it's a lot higher than that. Shockingly, the report showed that the rate of suicide amongst male veterans was 21% higher than the general male population, and twice for ex-serving women than the general population. The person who was a male ex-serving man who was discharged medically is 66% more likely to commit suicide than someone in the population, generally. Our view, Labor's view, along with many advocates, is that there needs to be a full and independent Royal Commission into veteran suicide to get to the bottom of this terrible scourge and to help those so that this thing doesn't happen in the future. Now, we cautiously welcome the government when they announced a report that back in February, after we announced that we would support a Royal Commission last year, the concept of a permanent National Commissioner for Defence and Veteran Suicide Prevention. Since then, many veterans and their families have become concerned that a National Commissioner won't operate as the government has claimed, or end up being little more than a glorified federal coroner with in-house desktop reviews of past suicides and hearings held in secret, keeping the issue behind closed doors and out of the public domain. We referred the legislation to a Senate committee inquiry so it could be thoroughly examined and veterans, families and advocates could have their say. The Senate inquiry held public hearings even in the last week, and a number of organisations and individuals appeared as witnesses in those public hearings. Many veterans and family members told the inquiry they have serious concerns with the government's proposed National Commissioner and preferred a Royal Commission into veteran suicide. A majority of witnesses believed the scope of the role was too narrow and that the former ACT magistrate and now interim National Commissioner, Dr. Bernadette Boss, was not sufficiently independent given her long association with the ADF. While Labor has no personal criticism of Dr. Boss, we note the government announced her appointment before the legislation was even debated in Parliament and without any significant consultation with stakeholders. We would have thought a retired Supreme or Federal Court judge, for example, could bring fresh eyes. Independence was a more appropriate appointment. The Senate inquiry is going to report back by the 30th of November, and in the meantime, we have and will continue to engage with veterans community and stakeholders, and we'll come to a final position as we go through the processes after the Senate has given their report. And we've seen the outcome of the report and any government response to it. We have serious concerns that the National Commissioner won't have the resources and will not have the independence from government to ask really hard questions that a Royal Commission can. And we've seen that in areas like institutional child abuse, in aged care, in disability, that a Royal Commission, the impact a Royal Commission has had in this space. We think it would have been preferable that any permanent standing body be informed first by the recommendations of a Royal Commission. Now, in the context of the IGADF, the best thing we think the government could do now to show faith with veterans and their families is to commit to establishing a Royal Commission into veteran suicide so we can tackle this national shame and tragedy once and for all. And I might add, in my response to the Minister's statement on ministerial issues in Parliament recently, the government has only responded to 25 of the 69 recommendations of the Productivity Commission report. They're still to respond to the rest of them. It took them till the budget to announce they would not touch the gold card, even though we asked many questions and the Veterans Committees were very uncertain about it. The government should have had an announcement, should have had their national health and wellbeing strategy out by the end of last year. It took them till May the 15th this year, and they put their strategy on a website without a press release. It's a list of, or litany of programs, almost as many pictures and blank pages as there are recommendations and things that need to be done. The government announced the National Commissioner in February this year, And still the legislation is yet to go to the Senate. If the government was fair income, as they claim they are in this space, they would have had the legislation in this space and would have consulted with the opposition and with stakeholders more broadly and more successfully in this area. In closing, I want to thank you once again for having me here. I look forward to continuing to work with you to deliver better outcomes for Queenslanders. And I thank the local RSLs, particularly around Ipswich and the Somerset region. I see Rob there and I see Ray over there and a number of others who I recognise. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for what you've done. Thank you for those who've served in this community and for the work you've done. It's not just the service you've done in the uniform, it's the service you've done in our community here in Queensland after that. I acknowledge all of you who have served our nation. I thank your loved ones who've served with you in many ways, and the wider community as we've gone through these challenging times. I want to say to you on behalf of the opposition, we have your back. Keep up the good work. My door is always open. Thank you very much. Tony, to you and your board members, thank you for what you do.
Thank you, Shayne. That brings today's meeting to an end. I know that the State Congress is usually an opportunity for you all to catch up with your fellow members. I hope this is not too far away and that next year's AGM might look a little bit different. For now, though, I thank you for your patience today and supporting the changed format for this year's AGM. Lunch is now being served. Please enjoy your lunch and thank you.